in a dimly lit county auction house outside of Missoula, Montana. Time seemed to stand still. A German shepherd lay motionless in the center of the concrete floor. His scarred body told a story of unspoken horrors. The once proud war dog was now a shadow of his former self, didn't even look up as the jeers and whispers echoed around the room. Not worth a cent, someone muttered. Damaged merchandise, another voice added. Cher's voice cracked with despair. Opening bid $50. Everyone laughter rolled through the crowd until a chair scraped across the floor. In the back row, a young man in a shabby navy jacket stood up, his face half hidden in shadow. His steady but haunting voice cut through the jeers. I'll take him into the room. There was silence. No one knew it then, but this moment will change everything. Like and share your thoughts in the comments, along with the city of the person you're watching. Let's continue the story. Ethan Walker had seen his share of broken things at age 34. His calloused hands and distant eyes spoke of battles far from home. 3 years after returning from his last tour with the Marines, he still flinched at sudden noises and woke in a cold sweat. The small ranch in Montana he had inherited from his grandfather had become both his sanctuary and his prison. His daily routine never varied: coffee at dawn, caring for the few horses his grandfather had left behind, and wrestling with memories that refused to fade. The local veterinary department called regularly, but their voices only echoed on his answering machine. The medications they had prescribed gathered dust in his bathroom. He hadn't planned on attending the county auction that morning, but something in the classified section of the local newspaper had caught his attention. Ex-military dog was aggressive, no training possible. One last auction before euthanasia. 6 lines of text that made him cringe. His hands were shaking with a rage he couldn't experience since Afghanistan. The German shepherd's history was written in his scars. Military dogs were supposed to be heroes, retired with dignity. This one's ribs were visible through his dull coat, and the old wound spoke of something far darker than honorable service. The fluorescent lights of the auction house revealed marks that could only come from systematic abuse, though it was the dog's eyes that struck Ethan the hardest. He recognized that empty stare, the same one he saw in the mirror every morning. It was the look of a man who had seen too much, been asked to do too much, and who had finally broken under the weight of it all. Claire Thompson, the local vet who had been silently monitoring the dog's case, stood in the corner, her attempts to intervene blocked by bureaucracy and military records she couldn't access, looking at Ethan with a mixture of hope and worry, wondering if this broken soldier could help this broken dog, or if they would only break each other further. The paperwork took less than 15 minutes, no questions asked, no background check required, just a $200 liability waiver that Ethan signed without reading. The ease of it all made his stomach ache. A military dog sold like used furniture. He's all yours, Octane said, holding out a worn leather leash, though I'd recommend a muzzle. He was unpredictable. Ethan approached the German shepherd slowly, his boots echoing off the concrete floor. The dog remained still, but Ethan noticed the slight tension in his muscles, the slight flattening of his ears. He'd seen that look in the soldier's eyes before they prepared to attack. Hey buddy, he said quietly, crouching 6 feet away. I'm Ethan. I mean you no harm. The dog's eyes flickered in his direction, a brief flash of recognition in their dull depths. Ethan remained perfectly still, remembering his military training. Never approach head-on, never make any sudden movements, never show fear. Claire Thompson, the vet, stepped forward. His notes were incomplete, she said quietly, but he's been here for 3 weeks. Won't let anyone touch him. Barely eats. Ethan nodded, not taking his eyes off the dog. What's his name? They called him Zero because that's what he cost them. Bitterness in his voice. Soleil. Definitely not your name anymore, Ethan said to the dog. We'll find you someone better. The next moment, everything happened so fast that later neither CLA nor the lingering auction staff could agree on what exactly had happened. The German shepherd lunged at bid with its teeth, a blur of movement aimed straight at Ethan's throat. But instead of jumping back, Ethan remained completely still. Their eyes met and something flashed between them, perhaps recognition or a shared understanding of pain. The man's neck hot breath mixed with the smell of fear and aggression. Then the shepherd slowly retreated. Confusion replaced the rage in his eyes. Jesus Christ, someone whispered that he needed to be put to sleep. He was too dangerous. No, Ethan said firmly, standing up. He coming home with me. Putting the dog in his truck turned into another battle. The shepherd refused to move, his body frozen with fear. Ethan didn't push or pull. He just sat on the concrete floor talking quietly about himself, the ranch, about open spaces and quiet mornings. An hour passed, then to Mr. Walker the auctioneer, we're closing. If you can't handle him, we'll leave. When he's ready, Ethan replied in his tone, leaving no room for argument, until the sun began to set, casting long shadows in the windows of the auction house. The German shepherd took the first 10 steps towards Ethan, then another. By the time they reached the truck, the dog was walking beside him. Not trustingly but willingly, Claire watched them drive away as the setting sun painted the Montana sky in shades of purple and gold. "Good luck," she whispered, though she wasn't sure if she was talking to a human or a dog. Neither she nor Ethan could have known then that this was more than just a rescue. This was the beginning of a story that would reveal long-buried secrets, challenge military protocols, and ultimately show that sometimes the deepest healing comes when you help another soul find its way back. The light that first night on the ranch tested both man and dog. Ethan had prepared the old barn, creating a safe place with fresh water and food, but the German Shepherd refused to come in. He stood in the darkness, his eyes shaking as he stared into the enclosed space, the straw, as if it held unspeakable horrors. "Okay," Ethan said quietly, "we'll do it your way." They spent the night under the stars. Ethan sat on the porch steps. The dog kept a respectful distance from the fence line. No one slept as dawn broke over the mountains of Montana. Ethan noticed the shepherd had not touched the food he had left out. Dr. Thompson arrived early the next morning. "How had the first night gone?" she asked, noticing the untouched bowl and the haggard expression on Ethan's face. "We're adjusting," Ethan answered, his voice horror from hours of quiet conversation with a dog that would not come near him. A veterinary examination proved impossible. The moment Kla reached for her bag, the shepherd's demeanor changed abruptly. His fur stood on end from deep within. A low growl was heard in his chest. She stepped forward. He retreated to the fence, teeth beady, eyes wild with panic. It wasn't fear. Aggression, Claire noticed, kept her distance. It was trauma. Whatever they did to him during the day, medical equipment was involved. Ethan tried to establish a routine. Every approach was met with either aggression or complete withdrawal. The shepherd alternated threatening lunges with pushing herself into corners, trembled uncontrollably. By evening, exhaustion and frustration began to take its toll. The dog refused to eat for over 24 hours, wouldn't let anyone near her, and showed no signs of improvement. Ethan's phone was calling. Celia checked from time to time. She quietly said if they had gone too far. He hadn't gone too far. Ethan stopped watching the shepherd step along the fence line. He had simply gotten lost, like I had that night when a storm rolled in from the mountains. The real test began. The first clap of thunder blinded the German shepherd. He panicked. He crashed into the fence, smashing shoulder bleeding before running to the edge of the property. Ethan ran after him, the rain soaking into his boots. The dark figure of the shepherd disappeared and reappeared in flashes of lightning. They covered almost 2 miles before the dog crashed into a drainage ditch. Cornered and scared, looking at the shivering animal, Ethan made a decision. He sat down with the rain of mud falling on his face and began to talk. "I know what it feels like," he said softly, "when thunder rumbles like mortars, when every shadow is a threat, when you can trust no one because trust has killed your friends." The shepherd's ears twitched, his gaze fixed on Ethan. "But you can't live there forever, in that place where all the pain is. Trust me, I tried." Hours passed. The storm raged and died down. No one moved. As the first light of dawn broke through the clouds, the German shepherd took one small step towards Ethan, then another. He didn't come close enough to touch, but something had changed between them. They walked back to the ranch together, the two broken warriors, separated by sight but united by their arrived with news that would change everything. She carried a thick manila envelope. Her expression was serious. As she sat at Ethan's kitchen table, the military had finally released his file, she said, laying out the papers with official seals. His real name was Rex. He had served with the Marine Corps Special Operations Command in Minan, Afghanistan. Ethan's hands shook as he reached for the papers. The German shepherd Ethan, now called Shadow for his habit of following at a distance, watched from his place by the door. 3 combat tours, Claire continued, highly decorated. But then something happened. The records were heavily redacted, but there was a 6-month gap where he simply disappeared from the official record. Ethan studied the papers, his jaw clenched. "The training logs," he said, pointing to the action, "the timestamps they kept. He would not tolerate any dog. Moreover," Sile paused, pulling out the last document, "the dates of his last mission, they coincided with my last mission," Ethan finished, his voice barely a whisper. He stared at Shadow. The memories came flooding back. He was there that day we lost Baker's team in Kandahar. The revelation hung heavy in the air. Shadow's ears perked up, as if he recognized something in Ethan's tone. For the first time, he had voluntarily approached the table. "Someone wanted to forget his Sile," said quietly. "Military dogs don't go to civilian auctions." Ethan was not like that, not with a closed file. Ethan stood up, abruptly forcing Shadow to retreat to his corner. Who had been handling him? Who had been his last commander? Claire shook her head. "Those pages were completely blacked out. But I have a contact at the Pentagon willing to help, unofficially of course." As they spoke, no one noticed Shadow's growing agitation. That was until the dog began to whine a high-pitched sound of distress. They turned to see him scratching his neck. Ethan approached slowly, speaking in a quiet, soothing tone. For the first time, Shadow didn't retreat under the thick fur on his neck. Ethan's fingers found something metal, a small tag that had been overlooked in the skin and undergrowth. Call the clinic, he said. Claire, we need to see what this is. That evening, under light anesthesia, Claire removed the military identification tag from around Shadow's neck. The numbers were partially erased, but one name remained legible: the dog handler, Major James Harrison. Ethan's face had gone pale. Harrison, that's impossible. He was under investigation for ethics violations, fired 3 years ago. You know him? Everyone knew him. He ran an intensive training program. Rumors about his methods, but nothing had been proven. Ethan looked at Shadow, still groggy from the sedation. Still, when Shadow started moving his eyes the first time he saw Ethan, there was recognition and fear. Whatever had happened in those missing 6 months, whatever they had done to that dog, had led straight to some of the highest ranks in the military dog handler program. What are you going to do? Claire asked Ethan's representative. The answer was instant: find Harrison. Whatever Shadow had gone through, he deserves justice. They were all doing. None of them could have known then that this decision would put their lives at risk, or what the truth was that they were searching for would shake the foundation of military canine training programs across the country. The breakthrough came on a quiet Sunday morning, 3 weeks after he learned of Shadow's military identification. Ethan had fallen asleep in his chair on the porch. His nightmares had kept him awake most of the night. He awoke to the sound of whimpering. Shadow was lying in the yard, overcome by his own night terrors. His legs were twitching. Silent cries were tearing from his throat, mindless. Ethan began to speak in the same calm voice he used to talk to traumatized soldiers on the battlefield. You're safe now. It was just a dream. You're in Montana, on a ranch. The war is over. Shadow's eyes snapped open, but instead of his usual aggressive response to fear, he remained motionless, watching Ethan with an intensity he hadn't seen before. For a long moment he didn't move, and then Shadow did something unprecedented. He walked up the porch steps and sat down, keeping a careful distance but wanting to be close for the first time. Yes, I understand them too, Ethan said quietly. Dreams where you're there again, where you can't save them, where everything goes wrong. While he was talking, Shadow's ears twitched, tracking the dog's every word. Ethan continued talking, sharing bits of his story: an ambush that had robbed his team of long nights of rehab, a guilt that never went away. Dr. Thompson arrived later that morning for his weekly checkup and stood to the side. Ethan was reading the morning paper on the porch. Shadow lay at the foot of the steps, not touching, not quite comfortably, but peacefully sharing the same space, which was remarkable, she said quietly, keeping her distance so as not to upset their delicate balance. What had changed? We had gotten to know each other, Ethan responded, without looking up from the paper. Sometimes that was enough. The rest of the day brought small but significant changes. Shadow took the food right from Ethan's hand, though he still stepped back to eat it. When a car exhaust sounded in the distance, instead of running, he walked up to the porch where Ethan sat. Every action spoke of growing trust. Heavy and uncertain, that evening when Ethan cooked him dinner for Shadow, called Claire's contact at the Pentagon. The conversation was short, but its impact was immediate. Shadow, sensing Ethan's sudden tension, became cautious. They found Harrison. Ethan, who hung up and said he worked for a private military contractor who trained dogs for overseas mission security companies. His hands tightened on the counter, still hurting them, still escaping punishment. Shadow approached, drawn by something in Ethan's voice. For the first time, he let Ethan see his vulnerability, the slight tremor in his legs, the way his ears flattened against his head at Harrison's name. I promise you, Ethan said, kneeling down to Shadow's level, he would never hurt another dog, no matter what it took. We would stop him. Shadow held his gaze, and in that moment their shared trauma became something else, a mission, a goal, a chance to keep others from suffering the same fate. The German Shepherd straightened up. The ghost of his military bearing returned as night fell on the ranch. Ethan made a decision. He opened the front door, leaving it wide open. Shadow stood in the yard watching. It's your choice, Ethan said. Inside or outside, you are not a prisoner here. A few minutes passed, then with careful steps Shadow walked up the porch and into the house. He didn't rest, staying alert and near the exit, but he decided to go into trust, even if just a little. That night, for the first time since he'd been living on the ranch, both the people and the dogs slept without nightmares. The following week the ranch had an unexpected visitor. Sarah Baker, the widow of Lieutenant Michael Baker from Ethan's last duty station, arrived unannounced one morning. Shadow's reaction was immediate and surprising. Instead of his usual weariness with strangers, the German Shepherd approached Sarah slowly with her tail down, but not tucked. She froze on the porch, tears welled up in her eyes. Was it him? Wasn't it her? Mike's last letter had mentioned the dog, had said it had saved 3 of his people. Before its voice faded, Ethan watched as Shadow gently pressed his head into Sarah's hand. The gesture was so careful and so deliberate it took his breath away. Sarah sank to her knees with her arms around the dog's neck. For the first time since he'd arrived on the ranch, Shadow accepted, without hesitation, human touch. He remembers, Ethan said soft of military doas never forget their peel over. Accepted, without hesitation, human touch. He remembers, Ethan said softly, military dogs never forget their people over coffee. Sarah shared what she knew. Her husband's most recent letters had mentioned concerns about the dog training program. Specifically Major Harrison's methods. Mike had been collecting evidence. She explained he had said some Athena was wrong. The dogs were disappearing after showing seans of behavior problems. Shadow lay at Sarah as she spoke, but his ears were tracking every mention of Harrison's name. The tremors had returned to his feet the day before the ambush. Sarah continued, Mike sent me this. She pulled out a sealed envelope. Said if anything happened to it, I was to keep this safe. I never opened it. Inside the envelope they found photographs and handwritten notes, training logs showing impossible hours, documentation of advanced stress management techniques, and the most damning records of healthy military dogs being classified as unstable after reporting injuries during training. Harrison wasn't just cruel, Ethan realized as he looked through the paperwork. He was systematically breaking dogs that could expose him, and then removing them from the program. Shadow suddenly stood up, moving toward the window. The black SUV stopped at the end of the ranch's long driveway. Even at that distance, the dog's reaction was unmistakable, total terror. Go to the back room, Ethan said. Sarah gathering the documents. Call Claire Thompson, tell her to bring the files. Through the window they watched two men in civilian clothes approach. Shadow's growl was different now, not defensive, but protective. He positioned himself between Ethan and the door, his military training visibly reasserting itself. When the knock came, Ethan opened the door, just enough to block the view inside. The men identified themselves as private security consultants interested in